You open your eyes to the sound of coughing chickens and someone vomiting just outside your hovel. The straw mattress is damp with something that might be rain or regret you don't want to know. Your blanket is made of coarse wool that scratches like judgment and smells like old feet. Sunlight barely leaks in through a wooden plank with holes that pretend to be a window. There's no glass, no insulation, just cold wind bringing in gossip and mice. You slept in your only tunic again because it's the only thing separating you from hypothermia. Your feet are covered in filth because boots are for nobles, and you're not even close. Your mouth tastes like moldy barley, and your dreams were haunted by debt collectors and rats. A rooster screams outside like it just remembered. It lives in hell and wants you to know too. You stretch your back and it makes a sound like a tree cracking in winter. There's no mirror, but if there was, it would just show a peasant-shaped pile of despair. You sit up slowly, careful not to disturb the beetles who've claimed the bed as their own. Your fingers are stiff, your knees ache, and the day hasn't even started yet. No time for complaining. Someone's already yelling about sheep and bread taxes. Welcome to your medieval morning where hope is a luxury. And so is soap. Let's talk about cleanliness, or the lack thereof, because bathing is seasonal. If at all, you don't own a toothbrush, you chew a stick and hope it scares off the tartar. Your breath could qualify as a weapon in most kingdoms, and your armpits smell like betrayal. There's no running water unless you count the stream where the pigs and children both bathe. You share that stream with every other villager, and half of them have visible diseases. There's no soap, just ashes and a prayer to Saint whoever handles skin rashes. Your hair is crawling, literally crawling, and combs are rare enough to be heirlooms. Toilets aren't a thing. You squat behind a bush and hope no one walks by during the air around the village. Is a fine blend of manure smoke, sweat, and disappointment. You wipe it with leaves, or if you're unlucky, hay, which is just nature's sandpaper. Bathhouses exist in cities. If you're rich, which you're not and never will be, perfume is unheard of, unless you count scent of boiled onions and goat as a fragrance. You wash your hands only when blood is involved, or mud is actually slowing you down. Nails are black teeth, our brown skin is gray, and everyone has a personal colony of fleas. Congratulations! You are the height of medieval health and safety standards. It's breakfast time, which means it's time to pretend you're not starving again. Your first meal of the day is called whatever hasn't molded yet, and it's not optional. You gnaw on coarse rye bread, so dry it doubles as a weapon and crumbles like shame. Maybe you get a bit of cheese if the cow was kind, or if rats didn't steal it overnight. Milk is suspiciously warm and has a film on top that moves when you poke it. No coffee, no tea, no orange juice, just warm water if you're feeling luxurious. Sometimes there's porridge, which is just sadness in a bowl and tastes like wet cardboard. If you're lucky, a bird's egg gets cracked into it. If you're not, you get rocks instead. Food is survival, not pleasure, and your breakfast is just fuel for endless labor. You sit in silence with your family. No one talks because words waste energy and hope. The fire smokes because the chimney is more like a hole in the wall than actual structure. Your spoon is a stick, your bowl is chipped, and your posture is shaped by years of carrying firewood. The table is crooked, the stool creaks, and your stomach is already asking for mercy. Breakfast ends when the food is gone or when your father stands up. Whichever happens first. Now it's time to go work before the sun decides to punish you further for existing. You step outside into a world built from mud smoke and low expectations. Your boots are made of leather, if you're lucky, or just your bare feet with calluses. The road is not a road, it's just compacted sadness, mixed with donkey dung and puddles. You pass the blacksmith, who's already hammering iron, like he's mad at the world. The baker is yelling about mice again because one ran off with his dignity last week. Children are crying, chickens are panicking, and someone is already bleeding. There's no music, no cheer, just the rhythm of shovel sighs and wheezing lungs. You carry tools heavier than your dreams on a back bend from generations of hard labor. No one greets you because greetings are for people who still have teeth and optimism. You nod at the shepherd who hasn't spoken since his sheep ran away in '83. The sun isn't up yet, but your sweat glands are because mercy is a myth. You're on your way to dig trenches again, or haul stones, or chase geese. Every step is a reminder that gravity hates you, and so does society. No carriage, no horse, no bicycle, just your own aching legs and a stick to lean on. You arrive at the field just in time to be yelled at for being late and breathing too loud. Your job today is survive while moving rocks from here to there for no reason. The overseer screams instructions you don't understand because your ears are full of dust. You lift with your back, not your knees, because no one taught you better, and now it's too late. The sun rises with all the gentleness of a furnace and immediately cooks your scalp. You're already sweating through your tunic, which now sticks to you like wet bread. Someone next to you drops a rock on their foot. They scream. No one stops working. You wonder briefly what it would be like to sit down, then remember the lash. Your hands bleed your feet. Blister, your spine cracks like a haunted staircase. There's no shade, just a big sky full of disappointment and zero clouds. Lunch is hours away, and even that will be a bite of stale bread and angry chewing. Flies swarm your face. Your lips crack, your vision blurs, and you keep digging anyway. The man next to you coughs blood. You both pretend it's not happening. No one has time for dying unless it's scheduled after sunset. You think about rebellion, then remember you're too poor to afford revenge. And so the stones keep moving. And so does your will to live one rock at a time. The bell rings, or someone yells, or maybe a crow screams, and that's lunch break. You don't sit, you crouch because sitting is luxury. And there are no chairs in the field. Your hands are shaking too much to untie the string around your bread bundle. You finally bite into it, and it's as hard as yesterday's regrets and just as flavorful. Someone shares a piece of onion, which is basically medieval Gatorade. You pass around a flask of water that tastes like pond and regret. If you're lucky, someone has a bit of salt pork, but you're not lucky. A fly lands on your bread. You swat it, then eat both, because protein is protein. No one talks unless they're warning about bad wheat or local ghosts. A dog wanders by and everyone glares because it probably eats better than you. The break is 15 minutes or maybe less, depending on who's watching. You try not to look at the sun because it feels like it's staring back with evil intentions. Your muscles twitch. Your teeth ache, your stomach growls, and you chew anyway. Someone starts working early to impress the Lord Steward or avoid a beating. You sigh deeply, finish chewing sand, disguised as food, and return to your post. Afternoon hits like a hammer to the soul, and you're not sure what day it is anymore. Your body stopped complaining a while ago. It's just humming with silent suffering. Blisters have become part of your identity. You name them out of spite. You haul wood, dig holes, mend fences, or stack rocks while praying for mild injury. No one knows why this work is necessary. It's just always there, always waiting. The fields are endless, the crops stubborn, the tools older than common sense. Your back itches, but your hands are too filthy to scratch it without starting a rash. The wind kicks up dust and everyone closes their eyes and keeps moving. The Lord rides by on a horse that probably eats 3 times as much as you. He doesn't make eye contact because peasants aren't real people, just useful background. You feel your brain drifting toward thoughts of escape, but you remember you can't read maps. Your friend mutters a curse. You both laugh bitterly and return to the shovel. There's no break, no bonus, no applause. Just labor until the sky turns red. You think about poetry, then remember you don't know what poetry is. You keep working because stopping gets you whipped, and you're out of bandages. The sun finally starts to fall like your morale, but that doesn't mean you're done. You trudge back into the village. dragging your limbs like leftover meat. The streets are busy with the stink of humanity, and everyone pretending they're fine. Someone's shouting about a stolen goat or a cursed well. No one is surprised. Children run barefoot through mud yelling made-up words and throwing pebbles. The butcher stall reeks of old blood and flies are throwing a rave on the cow carcass. Women trade rumors like currency. Someone swears they saw a witch near the forest. Your neighbor is bragging about finding a coin which probably fell from a beggar. The old man on the bench hasn't moved since last harvest. No one checks if he's alive. You step over something squishy and don't ask questions because answers hurt. A cart breaks a wheel and spills turnips everywhere. It's the most exciting thing this month. You nod at a passing monk who smells like mushrooms and eternal regret. Your tunic is stuck to your skin. Your stomach is growling and your legs are hollow. The sun dips behind the trees and the chill returns like a debt collector. Time to go home and pretend this wasn't the worst day of your life again. You enter your hovel where the air is thicker than soup and twice as smoky. Your wife is stirring something in a pot that smells like boiled grass and desperation. Dinner is pulse, a slop of beans, lentils, and sorrow, with maybe a hint of garlic. Everyone eats silently, chewing like it's a competition in suffering. The kids are asleep already, or pretending to avoid chores. Either way, they win. There's no meat, no spice, no joy, just sustenance, served with a side of melancholy. You drink from a shared cup that tastes like it's seen too many mouths. The fire crackles weakly, trying its best like the rest of your life. Your wife asks how work was. You grunt and nod. That's all the energy left. You wipe your mouth with your sleeve because napkins are only for kings and liars. Someone farts and no one reacts. It's just part of the ambience. Dinner ends when the pot is empty, or your soul is so full of sadness it spills. You sit in the corner scratching your beard and thinking about the goats again. Outside, a dog howls and a baby cries, and the moon looks down unimpressed. You lie down on the straw again and prepare for another beautiful medieval night. Night doesn't mean peace, it just means different kinds of discomfort. The wind howls through cracks in the wall, bringing in both cold and curses. Your bed is itchy, your pillow is a sack of failure, and your dreams are unsettling. Rats scurry across the beams like they pay rent and own the place. You try to sleep, but your back spasms like it's fighting invisible demons. Your wife snores like a drunken bard, and the fire dies without saying goodbye. Someone outside is shouting about wolves again, or maybe bandits. No one checks. You shift positions, and something sharp jabs your thigh, probably a nail, or God's wrath. The air smells like smoke, sweat, old cheese, and barnyard memories. Sleep comes slowly, dragging its feet like a tired mule, and bringing no rest. You count blisters instead of sheep because at least those are real. The dog barks at nothing again, reminding you of your place in the universe. Your feet cramp, your hands twitch, and your ears ring from silence and past trauma. Eventually, you drift off only to wake up 20 minutes later to more shouting. Tomorrow will be the same, but you'll survive because that's all anyone does here. You make your way to the market square because apparently that's where people in ancient times go to prove they are still alive. It smells like sweat, sadness, fish, and regret all mixed together like a soup of bad choices. Vendors scream about their olives and pottery like it's Black Friday at Walmart, but everyone's broke and angry. You pass a guy selling bread that looks like it fought in a war and lost, and another guy carving something that might be a goat or might be his ex. There's no music, only the sound of bartering, grunting, and something splashing that you pray isn't what you think it is. Children run barefoot, stepping on rocks like their feet are made of steel, and they laugh like little demons of the street. A woman argues with a merchant over a chicken's soul, or maybe just its weight. You can't tell anymore. You realize coins have no real value when everyone looks like they trade their cousin for half a fig. The sun is directly over your head, like it personally wants you to die, and your armpits feel like small swamps forming civilizations. Someone throws a cabbage at someone else, and nobody flinches because that's just Tuesday apparently. You try to ask where the bathroom is, and a man with one tooth points at a wall and laughs until he coughs blood. You walk away and trip on a rat that's definitely been lifting weights with its tail. A vendor offers you a fresh fish that winks at you, and you scream a little internally. The smell of garum wafts through the air again, like an ancient curse from Poseidon's trash bin. You realize everyone here is tired, hungry, slightly violent, and weirdly okay with it. You finally escape the market with your life, your coins, and a single bruised apple that probably predates language. You head to your friend's house, because suffering is best shared and he owes you wine or at least emotional support. He lives near the edge of the city, where the houses get smaller and the screaming gets louder. You knock and a child opens the door with knife in one hand and grapes in the other, like a chaotic Roman welcome party. The inside smells like old wool and fermented sadness, but it's still better than your place. Your friend is passed out in a corner with wine on his chin and a cat on his face, like an art installation called depression. You sit on a rock pretending it's a chair, because furniture is for rich people or Greeks. The conversation is slow, because your friend just woke up and is still unsure what century it is. He offers you some stew that looks like someone boiled a shoe with ambition and pepper. You say no, but he insists. So now you're chewing leather pretending it's flavor. The window view is just a donkey eating a scroll and a man screaming at the sky, like he's been personally betrayed by the weather. Your friend starts ranting about Texas roads and how aqueducts are just fancy pea highways. You nod because honestly, he's making sense in a weird, sleep-deprived, revolutionary kind of way. You try to laugh, but your mouth sticks together from the shoes too. And now you're rethinking your life choices. The cat on his face stares at you like it knows you're not supposed to be here. Eventually you leave, but not before taking one sip of the wine, which instantly burns your soul and your regrets. You decide to walk around to clear your head, which is ancient code for getting lost without GPS or hope. The streets are packed with carts, animals, beggars, and a mime who definitely just robbed someone. There's a man juggling knives while preaching philosophy, which feels on brand for the era. Someone bumps into you, and you instinctively check for coins because pickpocketing is basically a national sport. You pass a temple where people chant in a language you don't understand to a god you've never heard of with more arms than sense. A donkey kicks over a barrel, and the crowd cheers like it's the main event. A group of teenagers throw figs at statues because vandalism is timeless and figs are disgusting. You find a fountain that's supposed to be sacred, but it looks like a public bathtub for squirrels and nightmares. You consider sitting on the edge, but remember, your tunic is one sneeze away from collapse. A philosopher tries to recruit you into his cult by offering raisins and yelling about the moon's betrayal. You politely decline and speed walk away, like a nervous intern at a weird networking event. There's a man with one sandal dancing to a rhythm only he can hear, and honestly, he seems the happiest out of everyone. You trip over a rock, which turns out to be a sleeping man who yells at you in Greek and curses your goat lineage. You say, sorry, and he offers you a lizard for protection. And now you're starting to think maybe he's onto something. Eventually, you end up back where you started wondering how people survived without Google Maps or willpower. You find a public bench made of stone that mocks your bones and silently dares you to sit. You do because your feet are crying and your soul needs a timeout from whatever this life is. Across the street, a group of women are weaving something that might be clothes or possibly a trap. They talk and laugh and occasionally glare at men like they're already plotting revolutions. A man with no teeth is playing a flute badly but passionately, and his dog sings along like a tortured ghost. Two soldiers walk by, flexing their muscles like gladiators on a lunch break, but one trips on chicken poop and shatters the illusion. A priest blesses a goat that promptly poops on his foot, and everyone pretends not to see it. The clouds start to gather like they're planning a drama series, and the wind picks up like it knows something you don't. You pull your tunic tighter and wish for socks even though socks haven't been invented yet because life is cruel. A young boy sells something called miracle berries that are just grapes with lies. He offers one, and when you say no, he calls you a coward and throws one at your head. An old man starts shouting about the end of days because a bird landed upside down on his roof. Nobody really listens, but everyone pretends to care just enough to avoid the curse. The stone bench begins to feel like your spine is slowly fusing into ancient furniture. You finally get up and realize you've been sitting on someone's sandwich the entire time, and they don't even care. You walk aimlessly toward the bathhouse because everyone says it's relaxing, but they also said the stew was edible. The bathhouse looks impressive from the outside, with columns, statues, and zero indication of hygiene. Inside, it's a sauna of naked strangers, sweat mystery liquids, and an aggressive amount of steam. A man rubs oil on another man while making intense eye contact, and you immediately regret everything. You're handed a strigil, which is basically a fancy butter knife for scraping shame off your skin. The water is warm suspiciously, so like it has secrets you don't want to know. You try to relax, but someone next to you is humming a tune that sounds like impending doom. A woman screams in the distance, and someone says she just stepped on a fish. No one questions it. A group of men debate whether Caesar is actually a god or just really good at lying. You sit still, hoping to blend into the steam, like a ghost of poor decisions past. Then someone farts and the steam gets thicker, and now you're wondering if air was always this hostile. You slip on the tile, and a man catches you mid-fall, then asks if you want to join his militia. You say maybe just to escape, and now you might be in the army tomorrow. A child cannonballs into the cold pool and is immediately scolded by a man with 7 rings and 1 eyebrow. You crawl out of the bathhouse, feeling cleaner physically but dirtier spiritually and emotionally. You want to know what passed for fun in this dusty little Roman hellhole. Let me introduce you to the forum, the ancient equivalent of Twitter, if it smelled like livestock and was filled with old men screaming about taxes. You didn't go there to relax, you went to be yelled at by philosophers who hadn't bathed in days and smelled like melted cheese. Merchants screamed over each other like seagulls fighting for bread, selling everything from spoiled fish to fake relics of Mars. If you were lucky, maybe a street poet would recite something so depressing it made you question the meaning of olives. And oh look, there's another public execution, because nothing says community bonding like a good old-fashioned throat-slitting. Children darted between carts. Dogs barked at everything, and some guy is definitely trying to sell you a cursed idol for 4 sesterces. You're sweating, you're hungry, and the guy next to you is missing an eye and offering you a homemade healing salve made of ash and mystery herbs. You say no. He winks, and now you're emotionally damaged for life and possibly cursed. People call this the birthplace of democracy, but it mostly feels like the birthplace of anxiety. One senator is delivering a speech so long and self-important that birds are falling asleep in mid-air. You think maybe you should head home, then remember, your home is made of flammable sadness and screaming neighbors. The forum smells like ambition and desperation, marinated in fermented urine. You try to leave, but now you're caught in a parade of priests carrying a dead chicken and chanting about Jupiter's wrath. You are 30 years old and already feel 100, and this was supposed to be your relaxing day off. By late afternoon, your brain is fried, and your sandals are held together with twine and sheer willpower. So obviously, it's the perfect time to swing by the local tavern, which is somehow even louder than the forum and definitely more dangerous. This place is dimly lit, crowded, and every corner smells like regret and old lentils. The bartender is a guy named Gaius who's missing 3 teeth and knows everyone's secrets. You order the house wine, which is suspiciously purple and might be 30% seawater and 70% hallucinations. The man beside you slams down his drink and begins loudly recounting how he wrestled a lion, but it was probably just a dog. Another man is trying to gamble with a coin he clearly made out of clay and self-confidence. Everyone is shouting, someone is crying, and there's definitely a fight happening over who insulted whose tunic. You try to blend in by nodding and pretending you're not entirely sober or scared for your life. A woman approaches and offers you a love potion made of olive oil, garlic, and crushed beetle wings. You politely decline, and she hisses at you like a cat, which seems like a reasonable reaction, honestly. The tavern smells like burnt meat and broken dreams, and it's hard to tell where the food ends and the rats begin. Someone breaks a lute over another man's head, and no one reacts, which suggests this happens every day. You've been here for 12 minutes and already feel like you've lived through 3 wars. This is where people come to relax, which really makes you question what their version of stress must be. A man collapses into your lap murmuring something about Caesar and olives, and you wonder if it's too late to become a goat herder. You stagger out of the tavern just in time for the citywide aroma of wet garbage and ancient fire pits to slap you in the face. It's evening now, and the streets are lit by torches, which provide light, but also summon every flying insect in Italy. You pass a group of musicians who are either incredibly talented or just violently shaking tambourines at random intervals. The air is thick with smoke from 1,000 cooking fires, which means every corner smells like meat anxiety and possible food poisoning. You see a man proposing to a woman using a chicken as a ring bearer, which might be romantic or terrifying. Children still playing in the dirt. Women still yelling about stolen bread. Someone is loudly reciting Ovid while falling down a staircase. You step over a guy who may be asleep or dead. And honestly, you don't have the emotional strength to find out. Someone offers you a fig wrapped in a leaf, and you instinctively flinch, because last time you took free fruit, you hallucinated for 6 hours. You wander toward home past alleyways, echoing with laughter screams, and the occasional distant flute solo. In one corner, a couple is passionately arguing about who Jupiter loves more, which somehow involves a dead fish. It starts to drizzle, but the rain just makes everything smell more aggressively, like sadness and mildew. A man sneezes on you and whispers a blessing in Latin, and you can feel your immune system filing a resignation letter. The streets are alive with chaos and charm, and 1,000 tiny disasters all happening at once. Someone sets off a firework and everyone cheers, even though it landed on a chicken and may have started the fire. You finally reach your building and whisper a prayer to every god you can name, and some you just made up, hoping your room is still standing. You climb the stairs of your insula, each one creaking like it's about to collapse under the weight of your sins. And lunch, halfway up, you see someone's pet monkey escape and run down the stairs wearing a tiny stolen toga. Your neighbor greets you with a grunt while holding what appears to be a flaming bowl of soup and a haunted expression. You finally reach your floor, which now smells like old socks mixed with boiled cabbage and desperation. The door to your room swings open with a dramatic squeak that sounds like a dying goat and a haunted violin. Inside, it's exactly as you left it. Small, dark, stuffy, and decorated with your best attempts at not dying. There's your straw mattress stuffed with sharp regrets and flea colonies, and your wooden chair that doubles as a torture device. You light a small oil lamp and immediately attract 3 moths, 1 ghost, and a beetle the size of your thumb. You collapse onto the bed and instantly regret it because you forgot about the single exposed nail and the mysterious damp spot. You try to remove your sandals, but they fuse to your feet through a combination of sweat ash and ancient curses. Your roommate, a rat named Lucius, makes eye contact with you and nods solemnly before retreating under the floorboards. You stare at the ceiling and wonder what your life would be like if you were born in Gaul or literally anywhere, with working plumbing. Outside, someone is playing a pan flute badly, and it feels like the soundtrack to your mental breakdown. The walls are so thin, you can hear your neighbors arguing about philosophy, childbirth, and whether boiled lettuce counts as dinner. You try to sleep, but your brain is now a flashing slideshow of every trauma from the last 12 hours. This is not rest. This is a slow descent into madness, and you're somehow still better off than half the empire. And then, just when you think you're finally slipping into unconsciousness, a trumpet blasts from the street below. Apparently, some local politician thought now was the perfect time to parade a sacrificial ox through town. While yelling about Saturn, you sit up in bed, surrounded by darkness fleas and a growing sense of existential dread. Someone down the hall starts screaming about fire, and you grab your belongings, which is mostly one sandal and a stick. You stumble into the hallway, which is filled with smoke, confusion, and a man wearing nothing but a fig leaf, and panic. Turns out it was just a cooking accident, but everyone's screaming anyway, because panic is a hobby in this building. You help a child down the stairs, while an old woman throws water at the flames, and also at everyone else, just to be safe. The ox outside is now panicking, and someone's lute is on fire, which is either tragic or performance art. The landlord shows up 5 minutes late with a bucket and a total lack of helpful energy. You spend the next half hour trying not to die and also not to punch a guy who says the gods are testing you. By the time the fire is out and the ox has been calmed with wine and whispered threats, it's nearly midnight. You drag yourself back to bed now with added soot sweat and a bruised sense of identity. The rat is back now, wearing a stolen earring and looking smug as if to say, "I told you this place was cursed." You lay down once more and whisper the only prayer that matters: "Please let tomorrow be slightly less insane." But in your heart, you know it won't be, because this is Rome, and if it's not burning, it's probably about to. And with that comforting thought, you close your eyes to the lullaby of distant screams and squeaky ceiling beams. The sun starts to descend behind the smoky hills as your shift continues. Because apparently, 10 hours of backbreaking labor isn't considered a full day yet. Your boss comes by for the 4th time to remind you that quotas were higher last year, even though your tools haven't been sharpened since the last plague. You nod like a good little serf while gripping the handle of your hoe and imagining a world where people are paid for existing instead of suffering. The air smells like stale sweat mixed with manure and the ash of yesterday's failed sacrifices. Your shirt is soaked through with a mixture of blood from your hands and water you tried to drink but spilled because the clay cup was cracked. Someone's child runs barefoot across the field and slices their foot on a hidden shard of broken amphora, because safety isn't a word here. A merchant on horseback trots by looking clean, smug and untouchable, as if his shoes have never touched dirt and his face has never known suffering. You think about asking him for a ride just as a joke, but you'd be flogged for even speaking without permission, so you just lower your eyes and pretend you're grateful. The clouds roll in thick and gray, like a reminder that weather in this era is just punishment, disguised as climate. A farmer nearby coughs for the 5th time, and it sounds suspiciously like blood, but no one acknowledges it because healthcare is a strong breeze and a handful of leaves. You trade one of your only pieces of bread for a sip of wine that tastes like vinegar, but burns just enough to remind you you're alive. The younger boys start singing a song about a dead king who haunts this very soil, but it's not comforting, it's just tradition. You remember when you were a boy and thought work meant helping your father in the morning and being rewarded with a story or a slice of cheese. Now, work means watching your friends lose fingers to blades and praying no one notices your limp before you're labeled weak and cast out. You wonder if death feels like sleep or if it's just another form of work where you never get to clock out. Night begins to fall, and with it comes the mosquitoes, the biting flies, the wolves, and worst of all, the nobles returning home from their parties. Your job isn't over because now you're expected to help load carts of harvested grain onto wagons with wheels that haven't been oiled since the last king died. The oxen pulling the wagons are in better shape than most of the workers, and you wonder if reincarnation is real and you came back in the wrong species. Someone lights a torch nearby and it immediately attracts every flying insect in a 10-mile radius because nature has no chill in this timeline. The supervisor tallies each bushel of wheat, like his life depends on it, even though we all know he's skimming half for himself and the local priest. A man collapses beside you from dehydration, and two boys drag him away, like it's a Tuesday, because medical emergencies don't pause quotas. Your shoulder pops loudly as you lift another sack, but no one notices, and you quickly pretend it didn't happen because rest is not an option. A stray dog follows the wagon, sniffing for crumbs, and you envy its freedom, its lack of taxes, and how no one expects it to worship the emperor. Someone jokes that tonight's dinner is probably going to be rat again, and no one laughs because it's not really a joke. You try to smile anyway, because bitterness spreads faster than disease around here, and morale is more fragile than the village well. The stars start to peek through the clouds, like little holes in a blanket you'll never afford, and you think maybe the gods are watching. You hope if they are, they have popcorn because this whole life is one long tragic comedy that would probably win awards if anyone survived to tell it. You carry the last load to the barn, and your hands are shaking, but no one asks if you're okay because everyone's too tired to pretend they care. The wind picks up and carries the smell of burning pine from someone's chimney, and you wonder if warmth is even a real thing or just a legend. You head back toward your shack, feet dragging, knees aching, vision swimming from a mixture of fatigue, hunger, and centuries of bad genetics. You open the door to your hovel, and it creaks like it's screaming for mercy. And honestly, you feel that on a spiritual level, the room is darker than the inside of a tomb because candles are expensive and moonlight doesn't care about your needs. Your child coughs in the corner wrapped in a blanket that was stolen from a battlefield 3 wars ago and still has a bloodstain shaped like a lion. Your partner greets you with a look that says, "I'm glad you're not dead, but also, please don't touch me." You smell like despair and livestock. Dinner is already set, which means a bowl of something grayish-brown and vaguely warm that no one dares identify, but everyone eats anyway. You sit on the dirt floor and eat with your hands because plates are for people who matter and utensils are for gods. Someone outside screams and no one moves because it's probably just a drunk nobleman or a ghost. Either way, it's not your problem. The wind whistles through the cracks in the wall like it's telling secrets you're too tired to care about. Your child asks what tomorrow will be like, and you lie through your teeth and say it'll be better, even though you both know it won't. You tell a quick story about a brave knight who never existed because sometimes hope is more useful than truth. Your partner rubs your back for a moment before stopping because kindness is rationed and touch is currency. You hear rats skittering in the rafters, and you pray they stay up there because the last time one fell into your stew, it was too late to start over. You lay down on your pile of hay and rags and try to stretch, but every bone in your body feels like it's filled with sand. The candle finally dies, and with it your will to stay conscious, so you close your eyes and hope the nightmares take the night off. Outside, the stars blink silently, as if they too are exhausted by your entire existence. You wake up to the sound of the village bell clanging not because it's morning but because someone either died or got married, which are pretty much the same thing. Your back screams in protest as you try to sit up and remember that mattresses haven't been invented and probably won't be for another 800 years. Your mouth tastes like sweat, fear, and disappointment, but brushing your teeth isn't a thing, so you just rinse with stale water and pretend it helped. Someone is already yelling outside about a missing goat, and everyone's acting like it's a tragedy, which honestly, it is because that goat was dinner. You step outside into the kind of cold that bites, not nibbles, and you instantly regret being alive. The sky is gray, the mud is wet, your boots have holes, and your soul is starting to develop cracks. You stretch your arms only to hear your shoulder pop, like a branch snapping under the weight of too many regrets. The baker passes by carrying loaves that smell like heaven, but cost more than your weekly wage, so you just inhale and imagine tasting them. A woman nearby is arguing with her husband about dowries and curses, and it's honestly more dramatic than any theater you've ever seen. You smile for the first time in days, because misery loves company. And today, the whole street is overflowing with it. You hear a bard playing a sad song on a broken lute, and it's kind of beautiful in a rotting dreams kind of way. A man runs past, chasing a chicken and yelling about justice, and no one questions it because that's just Tuesday energy in this village. You walk toward the fields again because your life is a loop, and free will is a lie told by philosophers who never worked a day in their lives. Your stomach growls louder than your voice ever has, but food is a luxury, so you tell it to shut up and keep moving. In the distance, the mountains look peaceful and unreachable, like everything you've ever wanted. Your job today is clearing rocks from a field that shouldn't even have rocks, but apparently the gods are pranksters. And your suffering is the punchline. The rocks are sharp, the wind is cruel, and the ground is so uneven, it feels like walking on the shattered dreams of your ancestors. Your fingers bleed, but that's just character development in this hellish saga called existence. A crow watches you from a tree, like it knows your secrets, and is silently judging you for not dying yet. You throw a particularly large rock into a pile, and it lands with a thud that somehow feels satisfying, even though your spine now hates you. Your coworker tries to make a joke about taxes, and you both laugh, but it quickly turns into coughing because air quality is a myth. You see the village priest walking nearby in robes made of silk and gold, and you wonder how he sleeps at night knowing your roof leaks, and your god tax is overdue. A bee stings your hand, but you don't even flinch because physical pain is just background noise now. You hum a tune your grandmother used to sing back when she had teeth and dreams, and you briefly remember what hope felt like. The sun finally shows up like a lazy villain and decides to bake your scalp like it owes you revenge. You take off your tunic and tie it around your head, and now you look like a sweaty desert warrior minus the glory. A noble rides by on a horse, so clean it looks blessed, and you briefly consider throwing a rock, but remember what happened to the last guy who did. The wind kicks up and blows dust into your eyes and mouth, and you think, maybe blindness wouldn't be so bad if it means less of this view. Your supervisor yells something about working faster, and you mentally bury him in the rock pile you're building. The bell rings again, and for a second you hope it's the end of the world, but no, it's just lunchtime. So there you are again, back in the village. Dinner is over, and you've chewed through sadness and barks too. It's not like you can watch TV or scroll Instagram. Nope. Entertainment is two drunk guys arm wrestling with a chicken. Someone lights a torch, and everyone suddenly thinks it's a party. There's a man playing a flute badly, and he thinks he's famous. A dog pees on the same fire, and now it smells like roasted regret. Children chase each other with sticks because toys didn't exist. Your neighbor starts telling a story he's told 17 times. It still ends with him falling into a latrine, and no one laughs. You laugh anyway because otherwise he'll curse your goats. Someone starts clapping offbeat, another starts coughing up blood. The flute guy passes out from his own breath. Someone yells that Jupiter is angry and blames the moon. You decide it's bedtime because the universe clearly hates you. Sleep isn't easy when your bed is made of hay and rat dreams. You lie there staring at the ceiling made of whatever didn't collapse yet. You hear your neighbor snoring like a dying donkey next door. Something scurries across your leg and you pray it's not a ratkin. You try turning to your side, but the straw stabs your spine. Your blanket is actually just a wool rug stolen from the temple floor. It smells like ancient feet and moldy sacrifice. The village is not silent. Wolves are howling and goats are arguing. A thunderstorm rolls in, like it's also mad about dinner. The roof leaks and you feel water drop into your eye like fate's spit. You try counting sheep but realize your sheep were stolen last week. Someone yells outside that their wife turned into a snake again. You wonder if it's metaphorical or if curses are trending again. Sleep finally visits you in the form of unconscious surrender. And even in your dream, you're still in the same village. Morning slaps at you again, violently, without apology. The rooster crows like it has a personal vendetta. You wake up feeling like you were in a fistfight with your mattress. Your back sounds like popcorn when you sit up outside. Someone's already arguing about stolen eggs. The sun is up, but your soul is still somewhere under the hay. You wash your face with yesterday's rainwater and a broken smile. Your reflection in the pot water says, "Why are we still here?" Breakfast is leftover bark stew, but now it's cold and judgmental. Your cousin arrives asking if you can help catch wild bees today. You agree because saying no means dishonor or death. You grab your tools, which are mostly sticks and false hope. Your stomach growls like a lion on a hunger strike. You look at the sky and ask why you were born during this timeline. The sky responds by sending a bird to poop on your forehead. Bee hunting is just another term for pain on purpose. You and your cousin find a hive by a tall, cursed-looking tree. He says he'll climb it, and you'll wait below with the fire. You know this means you'll get stung while he screams. He climbs like a drunken squirrel and angers the bees instantly. They swarm like tiny demons with wings and no mercy. You run in circles, slapping yourself and cursing the gods. Your cousin jumps down, face puffed like a poison frog. You both roll in mud, hoping it will confuse the bee spirits. Villagers gather not to help, but to laugh and bet who dies first. One old lady throws a bucket of sour milk on you both. You now smell like defeat and dairy rot. The bees finally leave, but not before marking your soul. Your cousin says, "That went better than last time." You vow never to trust a man with 3 eyebrows again. You return home, looking like you lost a war against nature. Your mother asks if you fought wolves again, or just cried in dirt. You say both, and she nods like that's normal. She offers you herbal tea, made of weeds, and maybe sadness. It tastes like boiled forest floor and shame. You sit near the fire trying to forget the bees' laughter. Someone outside is trying to tame a goat using interpretive dance. The village elder says you've been chosen for tomorrow's ritual. You say, "What ritual?" And he says, "You'll see," with a wink. You remember the last ritual ended with a man marrying a rock. You ask if you can opt out, and they laugh like it's a comedy show. Dinner that night is burnt again, but you don't even care. Your cousin arrives with one eye swollen shut, but still smiling. You both nod in silence, bonded by trauma and honey pain. You lay down, hoping tomorrow doesn't involve more bees or rocks. The next morning starts with drums. Always a bad sign. When drums play before breakfast, you know chaos is scheduled. Villagers are gathering like it's a talent show. But bloodier, you're shoved into ceremonial clothes that haven't been washed since 1031. They smell like mildew, crushed hope, and faint goat pee. The elder declares that today is the ritual of fire and fortitude. You whisper, "Sounds illegal." But he just grins wider. You're handed a torch and told to walk with honor toward the pit. The pit is actually just a large hole where dreams go to die. Your cousin waves like this is normal and not deeply traumatic. You're asked to chant words in a language no one understands anymore. So you mutter something that sounds vaguely like, "Pizza Hut, the flames rise." The crowd cheers. You want to be anywhere else. Suddenly, a chicken is tossed into the fire and everyone gasps. The ritual is successful, which apparently just means you survived. Later, people treat you like a local celebrity for not dying. Children ask for your blessings. You offer them dirty pebbles. Your cousin says you're now spiritually upgraded, like an iPhone. You don't feel wiser, just smellier and possibly cursed. Someone gives you a crown made of moss and crushed dandelions. It falls apart before you make it home, but you thank them anyway. You sit outside your hut and reflect on life decisions, like, why didn't you become a traveling juggler instead? Or join a monastery where at least they feed you rice. The village dog licks your foot, and you consider that a compliment. A girl you've never spoken to says, I liked your ritual form. You panic and nod, accidentally agreeing to marriage. Now your mother is already planning the wedding feast. You try to explain it was a misunderstanding, but no one listens. You go to bed wondering how one torch made you engaged. The wedding planning begins before the sun even fully rises. Your mother is yelling at clouds for giving bad omens. Your cousin is carving your name into bark for decorations. The girl, apparently named Mira, is practicing goat dances. You still don't know if you're dreaming or being punished. Villagers are excited because weddings mean free food and gossip. The local blacksmith offers to forge you matching ankle bracelets. You thank him and pretend that's a normal romantic gesture. The priest arrives riding a mule and smelling like vinegar. He asks you if your soul is ready, and you say it has no choice. That night, you're bathed in cold milk and slapped with herbs. It's not spiritual, it's just tradition and poor planning. Your bed is decorated with wilted flowers and goat hair. You lie awake staring at the ceiling again, questioning the universe. You whisper, please let this be an elaborate prank. But it's not. The wedding day arrives like a bad thunderstorm. No way out. Everyone's dressed in their good clothes, slightly less torn. Mira is carried on a cart, made of broken furniture and pride. You walk beside her, holding a stick with a burnt ribbon. Your cousin plays the flute again, poorly and with extra squeaks. The ceremony takes place under a tree with suspicious bark. The priest mumbles ancient verses while chewing something crunchy. You exchange rings made of beetle shells and dry vines. Mira smiles like she's in love, or maybe just enjoying the chaos. You smile back because it's too late to run without consequences. The crowd claps, like this is the best show they've seen in years. Someone throws a turnip instead of rice. Tradition is flexible here. The priest announces, you're now bound until the river's dry. You hope he's referring to a seasonal creek and not eternity. You and Mira are officially married and mildly confused. The wedding feast is legendary for all the wrong reasons. The stew was mostly roots, tears, and something suspiciously crunchy. A goat got loose and ate half the wedding cake. A toddler fell into the pot and came out more seasoned. Your uncle tried to sing and summoned 3 crows. Instead, Mira's aunt started crying because the soup tasted like betrayal. Someone broke a bench, blamed it on ancestral tension. You just keep chewing, hoping your food isn't looking back at you. Villagers take turns giving you advice you didn't ask for. Always sleep with one eye open. One says, comforting another says, never trust a man who whistles at dawn. You're 70% sure that's directed at your cousin. The party ends with someone juggling flaming sticks indoors. It goes poorly. 2 people catch fire, but just a little. Everyone agrees it was the best wedding in 5 winters. Married life begins with Mira asking deep philosophical questions, like, why does our roof collapse every Tuesday? You explain it's probably a ghost with a calendar. She laughs and throws a beet at you lovingly. Your mornings now include sharing bark stew and awkward eye contact. You try to impress her by chopping wood. Injure 3 fingers. She's more impressed when you catch a chicken with one hand. Your cousin visits constantly, saying things like, you'll thank me later. You start sleeping closer to the fire because she snores like a lion. Still, There's comfort in knowing someone else hates life equally. You build her a chair from stolen fence parts, romance, peasant edition. She gives you a dead snake for protection. You name it, Carl. Together, you build a life of mud, madness, and mild affection. It's not perfect, but it beats bee rituals and forced stew baths. You begin to think, maybe love just means surviving the same storm. Winter arrives like an angry ex with frostbite and zero chill. Your hut turns into a freezer with straw accents. The fire barely survives, and neither do your socks. Mira knits you gloves that look like mutated mittens. You wear them anyway, and pretend it's the thought that counts. Food gets scarcer and more experimental. Bark souffle. Anyone. Your cousin suggests eating dried moss. You almost consider it. People get grumpier, especially the chickens, who stop laying eggs. Mira says, "At least we're freezing together." You nod while shivering. You try singing to keep warm, but forget the lyrics and cry instead. The priest comes by and asks if you've seen his mule. It's missing again. He leaves behind a mysterious sack labeled, "Don't open." You open it. It's full of squirrel bones and lavender. You don't ask questions. You and Mira cuddle under the world's itchiest blanket. Your dreams are now just memories of warmth and regret. Spring finally peeks in, like a shy neighbor with snacks. The snow melts, revealing months of buried failures and potatoes. People start smiling again, teeth optional. The bees return. You pretend not to notice. Your cousin says it's time for new adventures, and you panic. He mentions hunting swamp frogs. You suggest exile instead. Mira wants to grow vegetables. You suggest not on the roof this time. She laughs and throws another beet. It's a thing now. The village begins preparing for the seasonal festival. This year's theme is "Don't Die," very inspiring. Children make masks out of mud and screaming. The elder says, "You'll lead the festival's final torch dance." You say no, but somehow it's a yes. By morning, you practice twirling a torch while dodging goats. You're now officially the village's accidental hero again. The festival is chaos, beauty, and mild food poisoning. You light the first fire while people chant, "He lives." Someone faints from excitement or lack of nutrition. You twirl the torch, nearly burn your eyebrow. Crowd goes wild. Children run around pretending to be you, falling dramatically. The flute guy returns, still terrible, but now, with confidence. The air smells like smoke, hope, and slightly burnt onions. Mira dances in circles, with a basket of glowing stones. You smile like this is all perfectly normal, and not a fever dream. Your cousin eats 5 moss pies and claims enlightenment. The elder blesses you with a new title, "The Fire That Stumbled." You accept it because arguing gets you volunteered again. As the flames rise higher, you finally feel weirdly okay. You survived plague, bees, marriage, and stew. That's something. The night ends with fireworks made of dried herbs and loud screaming. Life doesn't get easier, but you've stopped expecting it to. Your days are filled with mud, chores, and surprise rituals. Your nights are filled with Mira snores and raccoon invasions. Still, you laugh more, even if it's out of confusion. Your cousin leaves to find destiny, probably in a tree. The priest writes a book titled, "How Not to Die." Mostly, you build a fence that leans but tries its best. Just like you, Mira plants beets everywhere. The village becomes Beetopia. You start teaching kids how to not light themselves on fire. The chickens return to laying eggs, grudgingly. The elder says the village is entering a new era of not failing. You nod and sip something questionable from a leaf cup. You no longer wish for escape, just slightly fewer disasters. Your story becomes legend, passed down by bad storytellers. And you live happily, messily, absurdly, ever after.
Night falls, but not like a gentle curtain drawn over peace and silence. In medieval times, night was the hour of the unknown, when firelight flickered and shadows took shape as demons. You didn't light a candle unless you wanted to attract every moth, mosquito, and hungry spirit within a 3-mile radius. The average peasant didn't own a candle anyway, because tallow was expensive and your income belonged to your lord. So what do you do in the dark? You listen to the rats chewing through the rafters, to the dogs barking at things you hope aren't real, to the wind screaming like lost souls in a narrow alley. If you're lucky, your neighbor isn't giving birth again with no midwife and only her drunk cousin yelling prayers. If you're unlucky, you hear the groaning of someone dying of the plague and suddenly remember you shared soup with him yesterday. Sleep comes in snatches like a thief. You drift off only to wake up scratching your flea bites or coughing up the smoke from your chimneyless room. You cover your ears with your straw pillow, but the night is loud and full of misery. Asterisk maybe the devil walks by outside, or maybe it's just the baker taking a dump in the alley. Either way, you lie there staring into darkness and wondering if God has you on hold. Asterisk. You think about bread and about death and about how you miss the one pig that used to grunt you to sleep. That pig was eaten last winter when the snow came early and your soul went hungry with it. Asterisk. And still, you don't sleep, not really, because this is history and history is never quiet. Asterisk. Dreams, if they come, are rarely gentle because your brain is a battlefield of hunger, fear and regret. You dream of food, but it always turns to ash, or your lord takes it away and throws it to his dogs. You dream of warmth, but your feet stay cold and the blanket smells like mildew and sadness maybe. You dream of love, but she marries someone richer and her dowry is a goat with 3 legs. Even your fantasies are rationed, like salt, like ale, like joy. You wake to the sound of your own stomach cursing you. Asterisk. It's not morning yet, just a pause in the nightmare. Someone's ox is loose again, crashing through fences, made of hope and soggy. Would you curse the world quietly into your straw mattress, hoping it won't hear you and make things worse? Your child stirs next to you, wheezing again, and you hope it's not the fever that took your neighbor's youngest last week. Asterisk. You wonder if God sleeps if he snores through all this mess, or if he's just very, very far away in the dark. You scratch your beard and feel the lice running marathons under your fingernails. You consider getting up, but where would you go? The only tavern closed when the barmaid died, and the priest is drunk until sunrise. Asterisk. So you lie back, eyes wide open, praying for dawn, not because you love the sun, but because at least daylight doesn't lie. It exposes everything, filth, rot, cruelty, but it does not pretend. The night whispers stories, but the morning shows receipts. You whisper back your own secret promise that someday you'll leave this place, but you won't. And you know it still. You whisper it anyway, because lies are the only things you own. Asterisk. When dawn finally arrives, it does so rudely, stabbing the horizon with dull orange like a tired butcher with a rusty knife. Roosters scream before the sun even bothers to show up, because chaos is always early. Asterisk. You sit up, bones cracking like firewood underfoot. Your back hurts, your knees hurt, your soul hurts, and all you did was exist. Breakfast is a concept, not a meal. If you're lucky, it's yesterday's porridge, reheated with tears. If not, it's just boiled water and the memory of oats. Children whimper for food, but they'll get a slap before they get a spoonful. You throw on your same crusty tunic and step outside into a morning that smells like wet hay and unfinished sins. Asterisk. The air bites and your boots leak, but that's normal. What's also normal is watching your neighbor carry his dead pig to the ditch because it ate moldy grain. Death is boring now, just a line in the daily schedule, like milking the goat or sweeping out despair. You check the sky for signs of storms or maybe miracles. Asterisk. But it's just clouds again, just grey, forever grey, like the soul of a monk who's forgotten joy. You sigh, the kind of sigh that means nothing but still somehow costs you. Then you start walking toward work, because what else is there but work and waiting and worrying. You pass a shrine and mumble a half prayer, not for blessings but for survival. Asterisk. That's all anyone asks anymore. Asterisk. Work is the same every day, a relentless loop of ache and mud and orders shouted in accents of contempt. You till soil that doesn't want you. You plant seeds that hate you. You carry wood that resents your existence. Your lord rides by on a horse that looks better fed than your family. He doesn't speak, just sneers like your pain is background noise to his hunting plans. The field smells like wet fur and hopelessness. Asterisk. Your hands blister through gloves made of regret and cloth older than your memories. No one sings anymore, not since the last song got taxed by the bishop. The sun climbs slow like it's embarrassed to witness this. You sweat in places that shouldn't sweat and bleed from cracks you don't have names for. Asterisk. Someone drops dead next to you and the overseer just says, drag him out of the way. Lunch is stale bread and a look from your wife that says, we are not winning. You chew like it's a punishment, and maybe it is. Asterisk. A bee stings you and you say thank you, because pain that isn't hunger feels like a change. And still the day isn't done, still the feels demand your kneecaps. You work because it's either that or think, and thinking leads nowhere. Asterisk. Afternoon is crueler than morning, not because it's hotter, but because it mocks you with how much is still left. Asterisk, your arms are numb, your mouth dry, your hope extinct, even the birds are silent, like they gave up narrating this disaster. Someone mentions a festival next month, but no one smiles because joy costs more than wine now. You wipe your brow with a sleeve that smells like goat. Asterisk, your teeth ache from grinding, not food but frustration. Children chase chickens, not for fun but for dinner. Asterisk, a priest walks by preaching about salvation with shoes cleaner than your thoughts. You nod, but inside you scream. The overseer counts your sacks and finds you lacking. Asterisk, so he adds a fine to your record, a fine you'll never pay with coins you'll never see. The field grows darker not because it's night, but because even the sun gets bored. You fantasize about escape, maybe a new village, maybe a quiet death under a tree. Asterisk, but you keep working, because your body doesn't know how to stop. Asterisk, a dog barks at nothing and you wonder if it sees what you feel. Asterisk. Then finally, someone yells enough and you drop your tools like scenes. But the walk home is still long and the misery is still heavy. Asterisk, night in Rome wasn't peaceful, it was something else entirely. You might imagine candlelit quiet with stars blinking above the Tiber, but instead it was firelight flickering on crumbling walls and voices arguing over dice. Asterisk, children cried in alleys and dogs barked at shadows. The streets were filled with whispers and running footsteps. Lanterns swung in the wind, casting long, trembling silhouettes. Asterisk, and the city's darker side emerged like rats from sewers. This was the hour of thieves, lovers' night. Watchmen and ghosts. Rome's underbelly throbbed with hunger and need. Vendors slept under carts curled up like cats. Some sang lullabies to themselves, others sharpened blades. The air smelled like smoke-roasted chickpeas and broken dreams above. All this Lucius tried to sleep in a room that smelled of mold and fish. His straw mattress poked his spine like a bed of nails. He stared at the cracked ceiling and listened to the heartbeat of the ancient city. Asterisk, sleep was a luxury reserved for the dead or the rich. Lucius shifted on the straw bed, scratching at invisible bites. Asterisk. Outside, a neighbor coughed the kind of cough that meant winter might win. Asterisk. A baby cried, as if announcing another hour had passed. The walls were thin and the night was thick with noise. Somewhere a man shouted about betrayal and spilled wine. Asterisk, to drunk women laughed in the distance, sounding more like banshees. Lucius closed his eyes and counted goat hooves instead of sheep. Asterisk. The mattress reeked of old urine and sour wine. He wondered if the gods ever heard prayers from rooftops. Asterisk, because that's where his hope went every night with the smoke. He whispered a plea, not for peace, but for morning to come faster. The oil lamp flickered low and spat once before going out. He wasn't afraid of darkness, he was afraid of dreams. Asterisk, dreams in Rome had teeth and claws and debts attached. The hours crawled like wounded soldiers across the floorboards. Asterisk. Lucius tossed and turned his mind, spinning like a potter's wheel. Asterisk, he thought of taxes owed and backs broken under sacks of grain. Asterisk, he thought of the senator's son who spat on him. Last market day he thought of his wife who once smiled before the hunger came. Every shadow on the wall looked like someone he'd disappointed. Asterisk. The moon outside refused to rise, like even it was ashamed. He bit his tongue, trying not to scream at nothing. Asterisk, because in Rome, if you scream you invite real devils in. He recited lines of poetry once taught by a kind slave girl. Asterisk. Each word now broken like pottery shards buried in mud. His feet were cold, his chest was tight, and his hopes thinner than his blanket. Asterisk. Sleep mocked him from the rafters, dangling just out of reach. His stomach growled and he answered with silence. Sometimes survival sounded like breath, sometimes like surrender. Asterisk. When morning finally peeled itself from the edge of the sky, Lucius felt like he'd lost a war he never volunteered for. His back ached and his neck was stiff as a gladiator's shield. But the city didn't care, and neither did the sun. Roosters screamed from rooftops as if celebrating more suffering. Someone banged a pot 3 doors down, announcing cheap olives. The neighbor's baby was still crying this time, louder and angrier. Lucius sat up and saw his breath like smoke from a dying fire. The world outside smelled of bread, soot, and beginning again. Asterisk. He wrapped his tunic tighter and stretched like a collapsing bridge. Asterisk. His legs trembled under the weight of another empty day, but quitting wasn't an option. Not in this city, not in this life. Asterisk. He whispered thanks to no one in particular, and stood behind him. His bed looked like a battlefield, still warm with struggle. Another sleepless night had ended, but the war would return at dusk. Asterisk. He walked down the creaking stairs, each step a prayer. The hallway was already filled with others who hadn't slept, old men clutching their knees. young girls brushing ash from their skirts. A boy held a cracked bowl, hoping for yesterday's crust. Asterisk, they nodded to each other, not out of kindness, but recognition. They were part of the same story written in dust and breath. Lucius stepped outside into the chorus of the waking empire. Asterisk, horns blared from chariots, vendors shouted over pigeons. The city was alive with motion, hunger, noise, and lies. The sun tried to pierce the smog like a needle through iron. Asterisk, somewhere a senator passed in a gold-trimmed litter unseen by most. Lucius tightened his sandals and moved like a man with purpose, even if that purpose was just to endure again. This was Rome, not the one in poems, but the one in cracked stone. And in that Rome, people like Lucius didn't live, they lasted. Asterisk. The streets of Rome yawned wide and swallowed men like Lucius whole. Asterisk, he walked past crumbling statues with pigeon nests for crowns. Past a bakery where warmth cost more than bread, past soldiers polishing boots and watching everything with hollow eyes. The city spoke in groans and grumbles and tired footsteps. Asterisk, his hands trembled not from fear but from memory. He passed a fountain that no longer gave water, just echoed. Asterisk, a woman selling figs shouted his name, but he didn't answer. He remembered her from when figs were gifts, not currency. Children played in the dust, throwing rocks like coins into fate's jar. A man begged with a song instead of a bowl, and no one listened. Lucius joined the crowd without joining the hope. They moved like blood through clogged veins. Barely alive, he rubbed his eyes and saw the same dream in every face. Asterisk, a dream made of waking up not richer but less tired than yesterday. Asterisk. At the forum, chaos wore a toga and shouted orders. Merchants argued with tax collectors, while pickpockets danced through legs. Lucius watched a man sell boiled cabbage with the flair of a magician, and another selling snake oil while limping from real pain. Coins clinked like bells of doom or salvation depending on the purse. He stood still in the middle of all that noise, searching for silence. Asterisk, but silence didn't live in Rome, not in daylight, not even in prayer. A fight broke out over spoiled lentils, and nobody stopped it. Lucius kept walking past the temple ruins where dogs slept in the sun. An old senator's slave dropped scrolls and cried quietly as they blew away. A boy with no sandals chased a dream made of flower dust and olive scent. Everyone here had a story, but no one had a voice. He moved toward the tannery, where smells punched the soul. Asterisk, each step was a decision between escape and surrender, and Rome kept whispering, you belong to me whether you want to or not. Asterisk. At the edge of the slums where houses leaned like drunk philosophers. Asterisk, Lucius met Gaius, a man who smiled with broken teeth. Gaius sold firewood that burned too fast and lied to, while they talked without words, just nods and tired laughter. Gaius handed him a bundle that smelled of sap and effort. Payment wasn't coins, but a promise to share soup later. Asterisk, they sat beside a broken wall where grass dared to grow. Children played with sticks, pretending to be senators and gods. The sky above had cracks like a ceiling about to fall. Lucius asked if Gaius ever slept, and the man just blinked. Slowly. Sleep, he said, was a luxury not meant for men like us. The sun moved behind clouds shaped like lions eating time. Asterisk. They shared silence like it was a loaf of bread, and it fed them both. Asterisk, for a moment, the city didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like an old friend who hurt you because it had forgotten how to love. Asterisk, as the evening dragged itself across the rooftops like a wounded soldier. Asterisk. Lucius returned to his room where shadows waited patiently. The lamp was out and the air thick with yesterday's regrets. He sat by the window watching the city fold itself into darkness. Someone sang a lullaby across the alley, but it felt like a warning. The moon rose half-hearted as if Rome didn't deserve its full face. Lucius didn't light a candle. He just sat with the night like an old companion. Below, a cat fought a rat and lost, and no one cared. A woman cried in the next room begging someone not to leave. Lucius closed his eyes but saw more clearly than when open faces of men he'd known, names of streets that hurt to say. Asterisk. He remembered his brother lost in a riot over stolen wheat. He remembered his mother whose hands smelled of thyme and ash. Asterisk. The city gave you memories as weapons, not comfort, and a sleep hovered just out of reach. Again Lucius welcomed the ache. Asterisk. His dreams, when they came, were twisted mirrors of truth. He saw himself in a palace eating grapes that turned to stones. He ran through markets where everyone wore his face. He fell from towers built of taxes and broken promises. A child pulled his hand and whispered father, though he had none. He floated on the Tiber where coins covered the riverbed like scales. Voices from his past shouted things he couldn't translate, and always Rome loomed in the sky like a god made of smoke. He woke with a gasp, not because of fear but recognition. Dreams here weren't stories, they were punishments in disguise. He sat up sweating, though the room was colder than honesty. Outside the bells rang not for prayer but for debt. Another day had arrived uninvited and full of demands. He wiped his face with a sleeve that smelled like labor, and whispered a name he didn't remember knowing before. The morning was ash-gray and tasted like regret. Lucius walked to the square, where work was handed like crumbs. He stood in line with others shaped by burden, not blood. A man coughed behind him, sounding like the end of something. Someone argued with fate about who deserved a brick today. Lucius got a job hauling stones for a bathhouse not yet built. The stones were heavier than guilt and just as unforgiving. He carried them upstairs that whispered lies about progress. Each step erased part of him like sand under waves. The foreman shouted in syllables that bit like dogs, but Lucius didn't respond, only moved, only endured. The sun mocked them all with its cheerful burning smile. He dropped one stone and it crushed a rat instead of a foot. The rat squealed and Lucius almost cried at the sound because it was the first thing all day that felt real. At midday they rested on cracked benches that didn't welcome them. The men chewed bread so hard it made their teeth bleed. Someone passed around a skin of sour wine like medicine. Lucius didn't drink, he just stared at his hands like strangers. Calluses told stories he never wanted to write. The city pulsed in the distance, reminding them they were nothing. A boy bragged about one day owning a shop, but no one listened. Dreams were dangerous in a place that charged for hope. The foreman returned and they lifted stones again. Each one a promise of tomorrow paid for today's bones. Lucius felt his shoulder rip, but stayed silent. Pain was a teacher no one argued with. By the time the sun bowed low, he could barely see, but he walked home like a soldier without a flag. Because walking was surviving, and surviving was winning here. That night the lamp finally died for good. Lucius sat in darkness like a king of shadows. His stomach grumbled, but he ignored it like an old joke. He reached for the wall like it might offer comfort, but the stone was cold and unforgiving as always. Downstairs someone screamed and no one helped. This was Rome's lullaby, chaos written in human voices. He thought of his childhood when he believed in heroes. Now he only believed in waking up again and again. The bed creaked under him as if warning it might collapse. His thoughts curled like smoke around forgotten names. Outside the wind spoke in gutter language. He whispered back just to hear himself still exist. There was no sleep, only the act of pretending, and in Rome that was close enough to rest. Dreams teased him again like coins dropped just out of reach. He saw a road paved with bones leading to a door made of bread. He knocked and it opened to reveal himself smiling. But the smile cracked and worms spilled from his mouth. He ran, but the streets folded like paper under rain. He fell into a pit where voices told him he mattered once, and then he woke gasping as if drowning in his own name. The room was still and yet everything moved. Walls shifted with memory and floorboards creaked with judgment. Lucius sat up and wiped his face with a rag once called clean. He didn't know what time it was, but he knew it was too late for escape, too early for sleep. He stared at the ceiling, waiting for something to break, and outside Rome yawned like it had never slept either. Maybe no one in this city ever truly did. Lucius stood by the window watching the sky bruise with dawn. Pigeons cooed like tired prophets, forecasting another hard day. The neighbor lit a fire and it danced behind broken glass. He breathed in deeply and tasted ash and ambition. Somewhere a child laughed, and the sound didn't belong here. He clutched his tunic tighter, not from cold but from ache. The street below whispered familiar threats and familiar accents. He had to go again, back to the stone, the noise, the battle. Not for glory but for another evening with a roof. He touched the wood frame as if it were a shrine. Every fiber of his being said stop, but stopping meant death. Lucius turned away from the window and faced the door, not with courage but with the only strength he had left. And as he stepped out into the city's mouth again, he whispered to no one at all, "I'm still here." As the moonlight spilled across the cracked stone floor of the abandoned monastery, the wind whispered through broken windows like forgotten prayers left unanswered. Gareth moved slowly, dragging his weary legs through the cold corridor, his torch barely flickering in the damp air. He had heard of this place, the monastery of Ashvale, said to house a library untouched by time. Its monks once guarded secrets from kings and warlords, protecting knowledge too dangerous for the world outside. He past faded murals of saints and sinners, all with eyes that seemed to follow him. In silence, books and scrolls lay scattered on shelves, warped by centuries of rot and mildew, their letters vanishing like memories. Gareth ran his fingers across the ancient leather spines hoping for a clue or a voice from the past to speak through the dust asterisk. Then a creak behind him, not loud but sharp, like a breath held too long finally escaping. He turned his torch but saw nothing, only the sway of cobwebs. Hanging from stone arches asterisk, the silence that followed was too still, too hollow to trust, and his gut clenched without reason. He backed into the next chamber where a domed ceiling opened above, covered in gold leaf constellations. The air shifted again, this time heavier, like something breathing with him, unseen but present. At the room's center lay a stone table covered in carvings of eyes, wings and serpents interlocked in chaos. The table pulsed faintly like a heartbeat deep beneath the surface, and Gareth felt something stir inside him. He touched the center where a sun symbol glowed, and suddenly the torches on the walls lit themselves in sequence, and from the shadows behind the pillars came the soft sound of footsteps, deliberate and slow asterisk. The figure that emerged wore the robes of the ancient order, but his face was veiled in a mask of smooth obsidian. He didn't speak, didn't raise a weapon, just watched Gareth as if measuring his soul from a distance. Asterisk. Gareth stood frozen, every instinct screaming to run, but his legs remained still, grounded by some invisible force. The masked man extended his arm, revealing a small scroll tied with crimson thread, aged yet intact. He placed it carefully on the altar, then stepped back into the dark without a sound, no echo, no presence. Asterisk. Gareth stared at the scroll as if it might bite, yet curiosity tugged at him stronger than fear. He reached for it, unwrapping the thread and unrolling the parchment, which was covered in language he didn't know, but the moment his eyes scanned the symbols, they began to shift and change, forming words. He could read asterisk. It spoke of a key, not of metal but of memory. Something buried in the bloodlines of those who could endure time. It warned of a curse older than kingdoms, a voice that demanded to be heard through fire, wind and silence. Asterisk. Gareth's hands trembled as the last words appeared, then faded away as if burned from existence. Asterisk. He blinked and the scroll dissolved into ash, leaving his hands empty, and the altar cold once more. Suddenly he remembered his dream from the night before, a voice repeating one phrase in many tongues. You are the echo of forgotten gods, carved from dust, meant to awaken what sleeps beneath a crack formed in the wall. Behind the altar, and light poured through, revealing a staircase spiraling downward. The walls breathed again, and the masked man was nowhere to be found, as if he'd never been real, and Gareth, without knowing why or what waited below, took the first step into the deep. Asterisk. The steps seemed endless, carved of black stone, slick with age and something older than water. Asterisk. No torches burned, yet everything glowed faintly blue, as if lit by the bones of the earth itself. Asterisk. With each step the sound of the surface faded, replaced by a hum, a resonance that made Gareth's bones ache. He felt like he was falling through time, not space, and flashes of images burst in his mind without warning. Battles fought in silence, ruins built by hands too large to be human, skies torn by wings that blotted the sun. At the bottom, he entered a chamber unlike the others, circular and vast, with no door in or out. Its walls pulsed like muscle veins glowing under translucent stone, and in the center floated a single feather. Asterisk. It was suspended mid-air without strings, unmoving, despite the swirling wind that now circled the chamber. Asterisk. Gareth approached, his skin prickling like ants crawling beneath the surface, heart pounding in rhythms not his own. He reached for the feather, and the moment he touched it, a scream split the air, not from him, not from any living thing. It was the sound of ages collapsing, the weight of history too vast to hold compressed into a single cry. Asterisk. The chamber shook, and from the walls faces emerged. Not carved, not painted, but living memories. Asterisk. They spoke in whispers, none louder than a sigh, all telling Gareth a piece of something he couldn't yet understand. He dropped the feather, but it didn't fall. Instead, it burned into his palm, leaving behind a mark. Asterisk. The shape was familiar, the sun symbol from the altar etched in fire, now part of his skin. And from the darkness behind the chamber, 1,000 eyes blinked open, watching him. Without blinking once. Asterisk. He turned to run, but the chamber stretched, twisted, pulling him back in like a lung-drawing breath. Asterisk. The floor cracked beneath him, revealing more faces screaming, this time in sorrow, not rage. The voices chanted one word again and again, not in English, not in Latin, but still he understood. Release. He cried out, asking what they wanted, who they were, but the answer came not in words but in feeling. They were bound, forgotten, erased from time by kings who feared what they could not control. Once they were teachers, healers, seers and guardians, until their truths became threats to power. Asterisk. Gareth fell to his knees as the knowledge overwhelmed him, his mind fracturing and rebuilding itself. Asterisk. He saw kingdoms fall not from war but from silent secrets buried so deep even the earth wept. The feather had chosen him, they said, not for greatness but for endurance, for madness and mercy. He could break the seal, return what was taken, rewrite the story carved in lies and shame. The floor began to rise, carrying him upward, the chamber fading behind. Into shadows once more his vision cleared, and he stood back in the monastery library. The feather gone, the mark burning bright. The scrolls were gone, too, replaced by one book on the table bound in skin. Not leather, humming softly. It had no title, no author, just a single handprint pressed into the cover, the same size as his. And when he touched it, the walls of the monastery breathed in again. As if it had only just awakened somewhere far beyond the trees, something ancient opened its eyes. For the first time in 1,000 years, the sky outside had changed. No stars, no moon, just an expanse of ink swirling like a great ocean. Above Gareth stumbled out of the ruins, clutching the book, unsure of direction or purpose, only driven by instinct. He felt watched not by one presence but by many, all silent, all waiting for his next move. The ground pulsed under his feet as if the world beneath remembered his steps from lives he'd never lived. Trees leaned inward, their branches whispering, names in forgotten tongues echoing across bark and leaves as he crossed the old road back toward the village. The sky wept thick drops of golden rain, each drop that touched him sparked visions, short and sharp, of battles, lost, of children, stolen, or fires that never went out. He ran, but the rain followed, burning trails down his arms like ink, writing a story he hadn't agreed to tell. The village came into view, but it was empty. Windows, shattered doors, wide open, animals gone, no bodies, no signs of struggle, just silence, too perfect, too intentional, like a paused moment in time. He called out to anyone, but his voice didn't echo, it just vanished, swallowed by the air. Inside the church, the bell was swinging but made no sound, only moved, with a rhythm not his own. The altar was overturned, the statues cracked, but the floor was clean, spotless, like someone had just scrubbed away history. In the center where the priest once stood was a mirror, not reflecting his face, but another place. Altogether it showed a mountain of bones, a throne of light, and a figure with no eyes waiting, seated, hand outstretched. The knight returned to the castle dragging a sack filled with relics of no value. The queen looked at him with a smirk that pierced deeper than any sword. She knew the relics were fake and the mission was a lie. The court laughed as the knight dropped the sack. In shame he demanded truth from the queen, but silence was her only answer. The king watched from above as if detached from the entire play. The jester danced in mockery, echoing the knight's failure across the hall. The royal cat strolled past, brushing against the knight's leg like fate itself. He grabbed the sack and stormed out without another word. People whispered as he left the hall like a ghost, already forgotten. Outside the skies were swirling with grey and restless winds. A raven landed before him and tilted its head as if to speak. He followed the raven through winding roads and silent woods. Each step away from the castle peeled off layers of illusion. The kingdom was not what it claimed, and neither was the queen. He reached a tower in the farthest corner of the realm. No guards, no signs, only ancient stones, breathing secrets inside. The walls pulsed with warmth like a living heartbeat. A woman stood at the center with silver eyes and twisted smile. She was the one who built the illusions in the queen's court. The sorceress of forgotten time, hidden away like a cursed page. She spoke in riddles and dreams, but her message was sharp. The queen had rewritten history and locked away its truth. The knight was not a fool but a key carved from memory. He was meant to fail at court, to be led here by disgrace. He stepped forward, demanding to see what was hidden. She waved her hand and a mirror rose from the ground. In it, he saw not his face but the king's hands, dripping in ink, signing lies into books carved by ancient scribes of deception. The knight clenched his fists and asked what he must do next. The sorceress handed him a scroll sealed in ash and wax. She warned him not to open it until the moon turned red. He took the scroll and felt its weight, heavier than iron. As he left the tower, the winds whispered his name. Like prophecy. The raven returned, now perched on his shoulder in silence. Every village he passed was different than he remembered. Children played games with rules he'd never heard. Old men spoke of wars that never happened and victories never won. He realized the queen had rewritten not just the court but the land itself. Even songs, sung by wandering minstrels, told false tales. He camped by an ancient tree where once A hero died in legend. Now the tree bore plaques saying it was planted by the queen. Reality was folding into fiction, and no one noticed. He read the scroll's surface again and again without breaking the seal. The moon above shimmered with a strange tint, almost pink. Asterisk. On the seventh night he stood atop a hill facing the castle. The scroll pulsed in his hands as the moon finally bled red. He tore the wax and flames erupted around the parchment. Asterisk. It unfolded into a blade made of words and memory. The raven cawed and took off, flying straight to the royal tower. He followed under clouds that split with silent lightning. Asterisk. At the gates the guards saw only a peasant and let him pass. He walked through the courtyard unnoticed, as if cloaked by thought. Inside the great hall, the queen held court with her golden tongue. Every sentence she spoke rewrote the books, mid-shelving. Asterisk. He raised the blade and spoke the first word of the scroll time, paused mid-breath, and the hall fell silent. Asterisk. The walls began to crack, revealing older bricks underneath. Statues morphed back into their true shapes, no longer polished lies. The queen's voice faltered for the first time as she recognized the blade. Asterisk. The knight stepped forward, each word peeling back illusions. Asterisk. The blade sang louder with every syllable pulled from history. The court gasped as their memories came flooding back. Knights who were cowards recalled their true defeats. Asterisk. Ministers who claimed wisdom saw their hands stained with theft. Asterisk. The queen screamed, but no sound escaped her lips now. The king rose but stumbled as his crown turned to dust. The books on the shelves burst open, revealing blank pages. Asterisk. The jester stopped dancing and bowed low before the knight. Asterisk. Servants kneeled, confused but awakened by some ancient call. Asterisk. He raised the blade high and drove it into the marble floor. A pulse of truth spread across the kingdom like a tidal wave, waking every soul from the slumber of manufactured memory. Asterisk. As the light faded, the hall was empty. The queen gone, the knight stood alone, but the world finally knew his name. Asterisk. The knight stepped outside the shattered hall, feeling the weight lift from his chest. The kingdom around him was stirring, as if waking from a 1,000-year sleep. People gathered in streets, staring at buildings they barely recognized anymore. Asterisk. Old temples reappeared that were once hidden beneath false architecture. Forgotten statues of real heroes stood tall where fake ones had been placed. The wind carried songs that no one had sung in decades. Farmers felt their soil become richer as curses were lifted silently. Children laughed as they ran barefoot across cobblestones that glowed with truth. The raven circled above, then flew west, carrying the final word of the spell. The knight knew this was not the end, but the first true beginning. He traveled from village to village, spreading the memory of what had been lost. Asterisk. People welcomed him not as a warrior, but as a storyteller of truth. Asterisk. Every tale he told repaired something invisible in their hearts. Even the trees leaned in as if hungry for the stories denied to them. The world had been rewritten again, but this time in honesty. Asterisk. But deep beneath the castle, where no light reached or breath escaped. Asterisk. The queen sat alone in a prison, made not of stone but of memory. Asterisk. Each wall around her was built from the lies she once told. She tried to speak, but her words formed chains around her neck. The throne she had claimed now mocked her with flickers of truth. Images floated around her, showing the people rebuilding the real history. Her face aged rapidly as the illusion that kept her young was broken. She clawed at the walls, but they would not crumble. Asterisk. She screamed, but silence clung to her like a second skin. No one remembered her as a ruler anymore, only as a shadow. The crown once filled with jewels now melted into dripping ink. She stared into a mirror that no longer showed her reflection. Asterisk. Only the faces of those she had erased or rewritten. One by one they turned away, leaving her truly alone. Asterisk. Her final punishment was not death, but to remember everything she denied. Asterisk. Back in the villages, the knight met an old woman who claimed to know him. Asterisk. She said she once changed his diapers when he was a baby with fire in his eyes. He laughed for the first time in years, not out of joy but out of release. She took him to a hilltop where a sword was embedded in a stone. It was not his blade but one belonging to a forgotten king of old. Asterisk. The woman said only the one who understands both lies and truth can lift it. He placed his hand on the hilt and closed his eyes, not to try but to listen. The wind whispered names that had been buried in dust and shame. The stone cracked but did not shatter. Instead it softened like clay. Asterisk. The sword rose slowly, humming with the power of honest blood around them. The grass grew taller, as if bowing to the moment he lifted the sword, and felt not power but responsibility flood into him. The woman nodded and handed him a journal wrapped in leaves. Inside were blank pages, waiting to be filled not by kings but by people. Asterisk. This was no longer a kingdom of rulers, but a story shared by all. News spread across distant lands of a kingdom reborn through remembrance. Wanderers arrived carrying scrolls long believed lost in wars and floods. They added their tales to the growing library. At the Hill of the Sword, a young girl wrote of her grandmother who healed without permission. An old man confessed that he'd pretended to be a war hero for years. Their truths were not punished, but honored and sung in town squares. The night watched as children painted murals of things their parents never knew. Legends once controlled by royals now lived in street corners and songs. People debated stories not to prove rightness but to seek understanding. Even animals began acting differently, as if aware of the shift. Birds nested in towers once abandoned by truth. Rivers changed course, uncovering ruins swallowed by lies. No one called the Night King or Lord, they simply called him the listener. He kept walking because the road had more names to recover, and each truth restored became a seed for a better tomorrow. Far to the east, a council of hidden scribes gathered in fear and awe. These were the ones who taught the queen how to rewrite time. They lived in silence, thinking no one remembered them anymore. But the tremor of truth had shaken even their underground chambers. One scribe suggested they flee to another realm where truth had no weight. Another argued that this was a chance to unwrite their own sins. A younger one named Elion stood and burned their secret maps. He declared that hiding would only tighten the chains they once cast. They climbed out of the darkness and journeyed toward the new kingdom. The knight met them at the border, not with a sword but with a chair. He let them speak their confessions before a fire that did not judge. They told how they erased villages with ink and reshaped families with quills. Some wept as they realized how many stories they had stolen from the world. The knight handed them blank scrolls and said, "Write now, but write with honor." The scribes became students again, learning to spell with care. The royal library, once filled with lies, now had a new name. They called it the Echo House because every story told echoed in another. Children ran between the shelves, touching old texts with fresh hands. No book was locked or hidden, but placed openly beside fire pits. Villagers came to read aloud the words of farmers, sailors, and healers. Even bedtime stories were no longer fantasies, but lessons wrapped in wonder. The knight sat on the floor among them, listening more than speaking. He smiled when a boy retold the queen's fall but made her a dragon. Instead, imagination returned, not as a weapon but as a healing flame. Old men sat outside carving symbols into stone, marking stories as sacred. The air changed, as if lighter, the sky clearer than before. Even dreams began to hold pieces of memory. Long suppressed, the raven who once led him now flew freely across every border. It was no longer a guide but a guardian of remembrance. Peace had returned, not through victory but through voice. One day a blind girl arrived at the Echo House with no name and no past. She said she heard voices in her sleep that led her to this place. The knight sat beside her and asked her to describe the voices. She spoke of melodies that sounded like pages turning underwater, of laughter buried under rocks, and whispers wrapped in wind. He realized these were not voices of people but of the forgotten world itself. He asked if she could sing what she heard, and she nodded. Her voice floated through the hall like smoke made of silk. People stopped what they were doing and closed their eyes. Her song awakened dreams. No one had ever remembered having a child cried because he saw a face he thought never existed. A mother wept because she felt a hug from someone long gone. The blind girl finished, and the silence that followed was full, not empty. She became the voice keeper, singing truth where words could not reach. The knight bowed to her, not as a hero but as a student. Time moved differently now, not measured by seasons but by stories shared. The kingdom no longer had borders, only paths marked by memory. Every path had a name, not of a place but of a moment. Like the trail of first truth or the hill where silence broke, pilgrims traveled not to conquer but to remember. Elders sat beneath trees telling truths that made the bark grow brighter. Even those who had once lied found redemption in open confession. The knight became older but never weary. As long as he walked, he carried not weapons but scrolls filled with names and places. At night he lit a single candle and wrote what he had heard. That day some tales were sad, others humorous, but all were deeply human. He wrote them not for power but so they would not be lost. Again he knew the past was fragile and memory was sacred, and truth once planted blooms even in the hardest soil. He walked until his feet knew every corner of the land. One morning the knight woke to find the raven perched at his feet again. It did not speak but dropped a feather made of glass and light. He picked it up and saw reflections of every life he had touched. The raven took flight, circling once, then disappearing into the horizon. The knight stood in silence, knowing the journey was nearly done. He returned to the first place he had ever remembered, the old tower where the sorceress first showed him the mirror. But now the tower was gone, and in its place was a field of stars. He sat down and pressed the feather into the soil. From it grew a tree unlike any seen before, with leaves like parchment. Children who passed by said the wind around the tree whispered stories, and whenever someone sat beneath it, they saw visions of the truth they carried. The knight smiled one last time and closed his eyes, not to sleep but to become part of the land itself. His body disappeared, but his stories lived in the roots, forever echoing beneath every footstep in the kingdom. Generations passed, and people still spoke of the listener with reverence. Schools were built not with bricks, but with story circles under the open sky. Every child learned that truth was not always clean, but it was always freeing. Artists painted murals of the night with empty hands and open ears. No throne was ever built again, only benches where anyone could sit. The raven became a symbol stitched into flags and carved into rings. It reminded all that truth flies not in straight lines but in spirals. The blind girl's voice still played from bells during every full moon, and the echo house became a living city filled with tales and tunes. New scribes were born not from royalty, but from farmers and singers. They wrote with hearts instead of ink, and shared with joy, not fear. The kingdom had no ruler, only a rhythm that all moved to together. And in every home, a candle stayed lit beside a blank scroll, waiting for someone to write the next piece of the never-ending tale. Because the story of truth never ends, it only changes form. The tower door creaked open, not with a dramatic roar, but a tired sigh, as if it too had lived centuries of monotony. Dust drifted lazily in the air, dancing like bored ghosts with nowhere else to go. A spiral staircase wound upward slowly, like the thoughts of a man with nothing left to chase. Ember stepped forward, his feet careful not to wake the sleeping silence that filled the stone tower. Each step echoed through the emptiness, carrying questions that had no one left to answer them. Walls were lined with old weapons, not polished trophies but rusted regrets from forgotten battles. Some blades were bent, some shields cracked, all of them looked like they had stories they'd never get to tell. A small window allowed a shaft of light to cut through the dust, like truth through legend. Ember paused and looked out over the vast emptiness of the valley below, where nothing moved but the wind. There were no enemies, no allies, no peasants, no kings, just the land itself enduring. In silence he felt small, not in size, but in meaning, like a single line in a scroll, too faded to read. His fingers brushed a blade that felt cold despite the heat of the tower, like it remembered killing. There were names carved into it but worn smooth by time until even the letters forgot who they were. Ember continued up each step, feeling like a lifetime waiting for something that may never arrive. At the top was a door made of black iron, carved with symbols no one in the kingdom remembered how to read. He reached out not with curiosity but with resignation, as though it was already decided he must open it. The handle was warm, as if someone had just left or something was waiting on the other side. When he pulled the door, it didn't fight back. It gave way like memory being forced into the present. Inside was not a throne room, not a dungeon, but a single chair and a table and a candle still burning. The air was still, like a secret being held too long, afraid to speak, afraid to fade. There were papers stacked neatly, not as records, but confessions of a forgotten mind. Each paper had sketches of faces, none smiling, all watching, all tired. In the corner sat a robe, not folded, not displayed, just draped as if its wearer had simply stopped. There was a sword beside it, chipped but clean, its blade catching the candlelight. Like a mirror of old oaths, Ember walked slowly, as if he was intruding on someone else's last thoughts. He touched nothing but felt everything, the weight of memory, the thickness of forgotten truth. There was no crown here, no gold, just the ache of stories never finished. He sat in the chair not to rest, but to understand the silence that filled this place. The candle flickered like it was remembering something too painful to burn steady. Outside, thunder rumbled like a voice too old to shout, too tired to whisper. Ember took a breath, not to steady himself, but to remind his body it was still alive. The papers in front of him looked familiar, not in detail but in grief. One sketch looked like the child from the barn, the one who had never returned. Another looked like the baker's wife who vanished in winter when the snow fell too. Quiet asterisk, the pages were full of names, some real, some rewritten, some erased entirely. This was not a historian's study, it was the last chapter of a kingdom that wrote itself into oblivion. Asterisk, the wind outside cried against the walls like an old friend not allowed inside. He turned to a final page thicker than the rest, its ink darker like it was written in sorrow. It spoke of a king who vanished not in death but in memory. It told of a war no one remembered, fought for a cause no one believed. It mentioned a man with fire in his hands and ice in his eyes. A contradiction left unnamed. Ember felt something move not in the room but inside his chest, like guilt disguised as destiny. The candle burned lower, its flame stretching like it didn't want to let go. In that moment he realized this was not a legend, waiting to be found. This was a wound buried so deep the kingdom had grown over it, pretending it never hurt. But here it was still bleeding on old paper, still waiting to be heard. Asterisk, behind the table was a box, small, wooden, locked, not with iron but with silence. There was no key, no riddle, just a sense that it should remain unopened. But Ember had come too far not to knock on every door of the past. He touched it, and it hummed, not with magic, but with warning, like a whisper from the grave. He opened it slowly, and inside was a crown, plain, simple, lined with red fabric, frayed at the edges. No jewels, no shine, just a weight, like it remembered every head it had rested on. Beneath it was a note, not written, but carved into the wood, itself shallow, but clear. It said, "We remember what we regret, and we wear what we deserve." Ember lifted the crown, and it was heavier than he expected, not in mass, but in memory. Asterisk, his reflection in the metal was not his own, but 1,000 faces staring back through time. He did not place it on his head, he simply held it and let the silence surround him. Outside, the sky cracked lightning, revealing the valley in white light, then darkness again. The candle finally gave up and died, leaving the room in stillness. Thick as sleep, he stayed seated, not to claim the past, but to understand its burden. The wind no longer howled, it waited like it too needed to know what happened next. And in that waiting there was peace, a breath between what was and what might be. Asterisk, he stood at last, the crown still in his hands, but lighter now, as if it had spoken its truth. The door behind him no longer felt closed, it was just a choice, waiting for movement. Asterisk. He walked out of the tower, not down, but through a different stairway. One hidden in shadow, each step felt like it was leading forward and backward at the same time. At the base was a chamber filled with mirrors, none clean, all cracked. They didn't reflect faces, but moments, grief, laughter, betrayal, fear, all frozen in shards. Asterisk, one mirror showed a battlefield, but the soldiers moved like memories, not men. Another revealed a feast, but every seat was empty. Food, untouched, wine turned to dust. Asterisk, he passed them slowly, each reflection pulling a different thread from his thoughts. One mirror stopped him, it showed him a boy running through wheat fields with a wooden sword. The boy smiled not to anyone, but because he believed the world was still possible. Behind the boy stood a man with the same eyes watching, not with fear, but with hope. Ember touched the mirror, and it felt warm, like it remembered too. He moved on, leaving behind a part of himself, the part still hoping for answers at the end. Of the hall was a door, simple, wooden, nothing grand, nothing guarded. He opened it and was greeted by the sunrise, not golden, but soft like the end of a long night. A rusted key was discovered beneath the bishop's old wooden lectern, where it had likely fallen centuries ago during a sermon no one remembered. The villagers gathered around the relic as if it were Excalibur itself, debating whether to turn it over to the abbey or try it on the mysterious cellar door beneath the infirmary. Of course, Gregory, the candlemaker, insisted it was a sign from Saint Bridget herself, and that only the purest soul among them should use it. Naturally, he nominated himself, which made several people scoff and accuse him of spilling wax into everyone's wine on All Hallows' Eve. The key itself was strange, longer than a hand and covered in carved symbols that didn't match any known script from the manuscripts. Asterisk, Father Callan warned that old locks hid old sins, and maybe the cellar was sealed for a reason that time chose to forget. But the people were tired of secrets and superstition, and the idea of opening something forbidden sparked the kind of excitement only boredom can ignite. The night they chose to open the door, the rain poured like judgment, and the torches refused to stay lit, no matter how many times they were relit. Asterisk, it took 3 men to twist the iron lock, which groaned like a dying animal as it finally surrendered its centuries of silence. Behind the door was a staircase made of bones, or so it looked, as the walls were white with lichen and knotted roots that looked disturbingly like fingers. The air was so cold their breath floated like spirits refusing to descend first. But Thomas the baker held his torch tight and went ahead, muttering a prayer to Saint Olaf, the protector of fools. Asterisk, each Step creaked as if waking something beneath the earth, something hungry and old that hadn't heard footsteps in lifetimes. Asterisk at the bottom was not a crypt, not a tomb, but a room filled with dried lavender dolls and hundreds of pairs of leather shoes, all child-sized. Asterisk no one spoke for a long time, and the torchlight flickered against a single sentence. Scratched into the far wall in blood-colored ink, it said only this: walk back slowly and leave your shoes at the door. Asterisk of course they didn't leave their shoes at the door. Because what kind of warning is that to give grown adults with calloused feet and heavy pride? They turned around slowly as instructed, because that part was creepy enough to follow, but not one of them removed a single boot. Asterisk by the time they reached the surface, the wind had stopped, and the moon was gone, swallowed by a sky that looked bruised and veined. Asterisk the village dogs howled for no reason, and would not stop even when beaten with sticks or promised meat from the winter store. For the next 3 nights, every child under the age of 7 refused to wear shoes and cried if forced to even look at them. A shoemaker's own daughter screamed when her father entered the room covered in leather scraps and refused to sleep under any roof. By the 7th night, 5 children had vanished, all under the age of 10, all last seen barefoot and walking towards the fields in the dark. A council was called and arguments roared like fire, but Father Callan spoke last and quiet, and said the key had been a curse all along. Asterisk he blamed Gregory, who blamed the baker, who blamed the blacksmith, who had already left the village with his family and a sack full of coins. Asterisk meanwhile the children's shoes were found arranged neatly in a circle outside the cellar door, no footprints around them, no sign of struggle. Asterisk Gregory burned the key, but the flames turned green and smelled like honey and something wet left in the sun. The ground began to tremble just a little whenever someone said the word shoes, and the lavender dolls reappeared on doorsteps every morning. No one knew who placed them there, and by the end of the month people started moving away quietly without packing anything but bread. The village shrank like bread dough left in the cold until only the abbey monks and the last 2 shepherd families remained. Asterisk they sealed the cellar again, this time with salt and prayers and bones from a goat that had never been named. Asterisk but the door still groaned every year on the night the wind turns east and the fields go silent. Asterisk by the time a century passed, no one remembered the shoes, no one spoke of the cellar, and the abbey turned into ruins crawling with ivy. Asterisk but the children in nearby towns still refused to wear shoes in autumn, and dolls made of lavender appeared on windowsills every October. Asterisk scholars from the city came one year eager to document folklore and record village superstitions for the sake of historical preservation. Asterisk they found nothing but friendly smiles and silence until one old woman named Beatty took them to the edge of the ruined abbey. Asterisk she said nothing, only handed them a shoe, small, brown and stitched with care, and told them it once belonged to a girl named Lenora. Asterisk one of the scholars laughed, called it charming myth, and slipped the shoe into his satchel with a wink. Asterisk he didn't make it back to the city. His body was found at the train station, barefoot with soil in his mouth and lavender in his hand. The satchel was empty, the shoe was never recovered, and no one went back for a long time. Asterisk years passed, and the story became whispers among archivists and night guards who worked the library's basement. They said the temperature dropped every time someone filed a record about the abbey, and that lavender sometimes grew between floorboards. One librarian kept waking up barefoot, despite locking her boots in a steel drawer each night, and finally quit after finding a doll in her glove. Still, the reports continued, and the footnotes multiplied, even if most were redacted by anonymous hands. Asterisk it was only when an intern researching medieval footwear fell asleep in the archives and woke up missing one sock that people started to worry. By then, the shoe had passed hands 7 times, and each time its new owner disappeared within days or went mad and wrote nothing but the word walk. Walk written again and again until the pen snapped and their fingers bled, and even then they used the blood to keep writing. Asterisk eventually a decision was made, not by officials or historians, but by the whispers themselves, as if the story was guiding its own next chapter. Asterisk the shoe was sealed inside a box lined with salt pages of forgotten prayers and the hair of a girl no one remembered. Burying it was placed deep beneath a museum in a room with no door, only a single stone that groaned when stepped on. The staff were told the room was haunted, and for insurance reasons no one was allowed to enter or ask about the temperature drop. Still, the lavender grew from the cracks, and some nights soft footsteps could be heard pacing back and forth behind the wall. Asterisk the museum cats refused to go near it, and children on tours often pointed at the stone and cried without knowing why. Eventually, the records about the shoe vanished or were renamed into irrelevant labels like Decorative Object 87A or Archive Error 4. But the story didn't stop, it simply moved sideways into dreams, into bedtime stories, into background noise when radios hiss. In the dark asterisk, one man claimed to hear a girl whispering every time he walked past a cobbler's shop saying, "Don't tie the laces too tight." Another woman said her child woke her up at 3 a.m. smiling and said, "I found the shoes, Mum, and they fit just right." The priest who lived near the museum developed a limp and was found one morning with his boots neatly placed beside his bed, asterisk. His feet were bare and purple as if he'd been walking through frozen fields for hours, even though the ground was dry, heels clutching a lavender doll, and the last thing he wrote in his journal was a single word, repeated 15 times, asterisk. Lenora, 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 Lenora. Asterisk. And so the village vanished, the abbey crumbled, the story buried itself beneath layers of reason, history, and forgetfulness, but sometimes, just sometimes, a candle flickers for no reason, or a child takes off their shoes before entering a church. Those are the echoes of the tale that refuses to sleep, the story that unlaces itself again every time someone asks too many questions. Historians still debate whether the key ever existed or if the cellar door was a metaphor for something else entirely, asterisk, but the children always seem to know, and they never want to play with dolls made of lavender even if they've never seen one before. Old cobblers in hidden corners of the world swear that some shoes whisper when stitched and bite when boxed, asterisk, and if you find yourself on a foggy road and see a pair of shoes perfectly placed and child-sized, you do not stop. You do not touch them, and you certainly do not bring them home, even if they look exactly like the ones your sister wore as a child, asterisk, because the story is not over, it only sleeps. And sometimes not even that. When the wind turns and the soil stirs, asterisk, there are stories meant for bedtime and stories meant for burial, and this one has always refused both, asterisk. It walks alone, barefoot under moonlight across time and tongue, wearing names like legend, curse, and history, and if you listen closely in the hour before dawn, you might hear it stepping lightly just outside your window. The lavender will bloom, the dogs will cry, and someone somewhere will wake to find their shoes missing. But the story will keep walking, moving from town to town, from mouth to mouth, from dream to nightmare. Because some histories do not rest, and some shoes never forget where they've been or what they've seen, asterisk. Morning broke over the fortress like a sigh of resignation from the sky itself, asterisk. Torches that had burned all night were now fading as servants scurried back to shadows. Lord Winthorpe had not slept again, his mind shackled by dreams of the lost treaty. Asterisk. Somewhere, in a cracked scroll, sat a clause that could rewrite fate if only found. He demanded the archivist's comb through ancient vellums, ink stained with sweat and hope, asterisk. The stone corridors echoed with their hurried footsteps, and fluttering parchment. One scroll dated 1183 hinted at a forbidden allegiance with the kingdom of Ashtonmore, asterisk. Ashtonmore, a forgotten name once erased by conquest, now whispered back into relevance. They were enemies turned myth shadows, banished beyond the forest of Grimlight. Winthorpe's fingers traced the sigils drawn centuries before, and he remembered. He remembered the tale of the red-haired queen who vanished in the storm of betrayal, asterisk, and her promise to return when the skies wept ash, and the moon hung low. The sky last night had looked disturbingly close to that forgotten prophecy. His advisor's counsel was to burn the scroll and forget, but Winthorpe refused. Some stories he believed should not be buried with dust and lie, asterisk. The next gathering of the council was met with unease and murmuring hesitation. Baron Tilmore's face was pale, as if ghosts had danced through his dreams. Winthorpe laid out the scroll before them, and silence crept in like a dense fog. He spoke of Ashtonmore, of alliances and oaths broken by ancestors, asterisk. One noble scoffed, calling it bedtime legend, best left to minstrels and madmen, but another, Lord Eldrin, recited words from his childhood, spoken by a blind seer, words that matched the scroll too closely to ignore. Like a mirror's haunting reflection, the wind outside howled, then went quiet, and that silence seemed to vote in favor. The council would send an envoy beyond the forgotten forest for the first time in 200 years. A messenger dressed in crimson and silver, chosen for speed over safety. Maps were unrolled, showing lands where rivers changed names and roads grew wild. Asterisk. In the east, beyond the Fen of Whispers, was said to be the Ashen Gate, a doorway carved of obsidian, standing alone in the field where lightning struck twice. Winthorpe pressed a ring into the envoy's hand, one not worn since the Age of Fire. They watched him ride off, his figure swallowed by fog and forgotten tales. Days passed like molasses, thick and slow, with tension boiling beneath routine. Reports came from the border of strange lights seen in the trees beyond the fen. Villagers whispered of voices at night, calling names Long buried in ruined cemeteries, Winthrop stood on the battlements each night watching the horizon and waiting, until, on the seventh dusk, the envoy returned, but not alone. He was flanked by riders in grey-bearing banners, stitched with ash and crow feathers. The Ashenmore emissary was tall, veiled, and carried a staff topped with dying embers. They entered without words, only nods that felt older than the walls themselves. At the council chamber, the air grew cold, though the fire blazed like summer. The emissary laid out gifts from a land thought burned away into legend: salted amber root from the Black Grove, water from the Mirror Spring, and one parchment sealed with wax, bearing a single word: rekindled. The alliance was not just accepted, it had been expected, as if time were merely delayed. Winthrop signed with the old ink from his ancestors. Well, iron mixed with crimson sap, a new treaty was born, not with pen and sword, but with silence and memory. Weeks later, the fortress changed in ways both seen and unseen, like shifting shadow. Ashen craftsmen built spires shaped like wind and carved windows that hummed. Children began dreaming of past lives and languages they never learned. The marketplace sold fruits that whispered when cut and cloth that wept in rain. Winthrop met nightly with the Ashen emissary, now named Selenara. She spoke in riddles and songs, saying history is not what happened, but what breathes. He learned of the Stormglass towers that once lined the edge of Ashenmore's border, and of how each tower fell not to war but to forgetting. When people stopped telling stories, towers, cracking kingdoms vanish in fog, so they lit a new flame in the central square that would never be allowed to die. Each night someone told a story there, even if it was just a memory or lie. The town slept better, but Winthrop didn't, for he dreamed of the red-haired queen, again. She walked toward him in moonlight, saying the debt is paid, but the cost is time. He woke with the scent of lavender and ash, though his chambers held none. The wall by his bed now bore a handprint scorched into stone. Wimp called the masons, but none could explain the blackened imprint. Selenara merely looked at it and nodded, saying the queen has returned as promised. She would not come through gates or courts, but through the hearts of her people. The storytellers grew in number, drawing crowds larger than feast days. A boy recited a tale no one had told him of a battle lost beneath the river. An old woman sang of a bridge built from bones and trust. Each tale was added to a new book bound in starlight leather. They called it the Rekindled Chronicle, and no name was required on its cover. For the book knew the hand that wrote and glowed differently for each reader. Winthrop sat by it one night and saw his own father's face staring from the pages. The book turned a page on its own and showed a future not yet carved. It showed the fortress floating above ground, tethered only by memory. It showed Selenara turning to smoke and returning to wind. It showed Winthrop laying down a crown not made of gold but silence. He closed the book and did not speak for 3 days, only listened. And the walls began to hum with songs from before the calendar was born. Not long after, the sky changed, as if repainted by a different hand. Sunsets now bled violet, and dawns shimmered with silver mist. Birds no one recognized nested in the watchtowers. Singing backwards. People began planting seeds that grew into mirrors instead of trees. Selenara told them the world was healing backwards before it could move. Forward memory had weight, and it needed to be unburdened before time could breathe again. One child disappeared for 3 nights and returned older by 7 years. He spoke of a staircase in the forest made of names and footsteps. Winthrop walked among his people and saw them shedding fear like leaves at night. The red-haired queen now appeared in dreams of not just him, but dozens. She always asked the same question: what will you do with the truth now? Some answered aloud in sleep, others wrote it on river stones and let them drift. The emissaries of Ashenmore eventually left, leaving behind silence and blooming ash. The fortress had become something more than stone. It was now a vessel, not of power but of memory, carved into time, with stories instead of swords. And Winthrop felt at last that he no longer ruled but remembered. The council eventually disbanded, not in anger but completion. Each member left carrying a piece of the chronicle to bury or plant. Lord Eldrin built a school inside a tree older than the map of nations. Lady Mira sailed west with books tied to kites that vanished into lightning. Baron Tilmore opened a gate beneath his vineyard and never returned. Winthrop remained until only silence sat beside him in the throne room. He wrote stories now, not laws. Some were fiction, but all were true. Children came to sit beside him and ask for tales of the waking fortress. He told them of the Ashen Moor not as enemy but as mirror. He spoke of the treaty as a promise not of peace but of presence. One child asked, "What does it mean to rule?" And he simply said, "Remember." The red-haired queen appeared to him only once more, her eyes full of stars. She said, "Thank you not for leading but for listening." He placed his crown on her head and it turned into mist, and the next morning the fortress had no king, only a storyteller. And the walls still hummed with stories years past, or maybe days' time, no longer moved in straight lines. The village that grew around the fortress built homes from songs and whispers. They planted gardens of forgotten names and harvested stories like wheat. No one kept a calendar, they marked time by the stories shared. People from far lands came not to conquer but to contribute. Ash was no longer a secret but a sibling. The forest between them became a library with leaves that turned to pages. Winthorpe's name faded from records but remained in the chronicle's glow. Some say he turned into a raven that visits children who forget their dreams. Others say he became the wind that carries old songs through windows. It didn't matter, for he had become what he wanted, a remembered silence. And in the center square the flame still burned, watched by storytellers young and old. They say if it ever goes out, the fortress will weep, but no one fears that, for each night someone begins again with "Once there was a king who listened instead of ruled." And every voice that joins becomes part of the rekindled chronicle which never ends, only begins again. The Ashen Moor emissaries returned once every 100 dreams. They brought no demands, only stories in jars of wind. The people gave them stories back, folded into bread and songs. No border remained, only rhythm and memory. The chronicle grew too large. 4 pages and was now kept in wind. It whispered to those who slept and echoed in the hooves of horses. New rulers came, but none took thrones. They took circles of storytellers. When disputes arose, they were settled by who could tell it truest. The fortress was renamed, but no one could remember the old name anyway. Winthorpe's statue stood not in marble, but in shadow where he used to listen, and beside it, a single stone bore the queen's handprint, burned forever. No army ever approached. Again, not because of fear, but because of stories. Those who came angry left singing, those who came lost left remembered, and the forest between Ashen Moor and the world became a bridge of echoes. Some still hear Winthorpe's laugh in the wind, and those who do often find new stories hiding in their pockets. So the fortress, once ruled by swords, became a citadel of memory. Its battlements grew ivy, not blood. Its halls rang with lullabies. Those seeking power were gently told to first learn silence. Those seeking truth were handed a blank page and ink from twilight. Winthorpe's story ended not with battle but with breath. He became the pause between heartbeats in every story ever told. Children now write their dreams in the chronicle, knowing they will be read. Selenara was last seen turning into 1,000 fireflies. The red-haired queen became a constellation only visible to those who listen, and the Ashen Gate now stands open, not guarded, but singing. So if you find yourself sleepless and wondering what history hides, know that not all stories sleep and not all silence is empty. There is a place where forgotten kings remember who they are, where wind carries lullabies and trees whisper names, and if you listen close enough you might hear the fortress call, not for help or war or law, but for one more story.